You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. Welcome back to Encore, part of the Precinct 444 podcast network at the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope you all had a safe and relaxing holiday season, and a huge thanks to all of our listeners who have been around since 2022. One item worth noting, we're changing around our scheduling for the early part of this year, so you'll see fewer but longer episodes, especially with the Encore show, like this episode. All our show episodes are published every other Wednesday, except Law and Disorder, which will be published on the last Wednesday of each month. Now, let's get into this month's episode of Encore. The National Law Enforcement Museum originally hosted a panel discussion concerning the implementation of body-worn cameras by law enforcement. Each panelist began by sharing their involvement with body-worn cameras, touching on issues of pilot program implementation, getting community input, and creating and analyzing policies for body-worn camera programs. Panelists also explained how they work to get communities on board with the idea of body cameras. The question of disclosure emerged as one of the primary concerns and challenges of body-worn camera programs. The general consensus among panelists was that this is a very complex issue, and that body-worn camera programs will most likely benefit their communities if implemented thoughtfully and with robust policies in place. And now for Eye on Policing, how body cameras change law enforcement.
Body cameras are certainly intended and most likely will help to foster transparency and trust between the officers and the citizens they serve, but they also raise a number of new challenges for police practitioners and the policymakers that have to help navigate this landscape. With body camera programs relatively new, we must look to the few departments that have studies to understand the benefits and the challenges. The first U.S. police body camera program occurred in Rialto, California, and it revealed dramatic decreases in the use of force by law enforcement. 59% decrease resulted from the use of body cameras in Rialto. Citizens' complaints decreased by 87%. So those were some very important benefits that I think we can all understand. Departments across the country have studied, piloted, and implemented body camera programs based on those facts. But the results of one or two departments don't necessarily translate to success for every district. We know that agencies across this country are different, whether they be small, large, medium-sized, rural, urban, and we have to understand the pros and the cons when it comes to body cameras for all of those various jurisdictions. We must also consider questions of privacy, security, and personal rights that are on the minds of every policymaker. How do we balance personal rights and public safety? And while these questions might seem obvious from the point of view of the private citizen, they're also very important to every law enforcement officer who will wear a body camera. Each of our distinguished panelists have their unique experiences with body cameras, and I'm happy to introduce them to you right now. Our moderator for this evening is Lindsay Miller Gudison. She's a senior research associate for the Police Executive Research Forum, one of our member organizations of our board of directors. She's testified before Congress on body-worn camera programs. Our panelists begin with Lieutenant Brian Grenon of the Seattle Police Department. He's a 23-year veteran of the force and oversees their body camera program. Jay Stanley is a senior policy analyst for the American Civil Liberty Union's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, and he wrote ACLU's white paper on body cameras. We have Commander Marcus Jones of the Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department. He's commander of their 3rd District. He's a 29-year veteran and is a former chairman of the National Black Police Association, another member organization of our board of directors. He is also a longtime member of the Memorial Fund's board of directors. And finally, Dr. Michael White, He's a professor of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University. He's the associate director of ASU's Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety. He advises the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Smart Policing Initiative. And we were talking earlier, he's also a former deputy sheriff and an expert on the police use of force. Before our discussion begins, we wanted to view some actual body camera footage. I thought that would help to frame the issue that we're talking about here tonight. This video is from the Rialto Police Department. It was recorded in the year 2013, and it was under the body camera of Sergeant Chris Heises. It shows police securing 2 suspected car thieves. So at this time, I'd like to roll the video to give us all a good example of what we're talking about.
Hey, Mike, you want to get the passenger first? Hey, passenger, I'm going to tell you to do something. I want you to do it step by step, all right? Use your left hand. Open it up from the outside. Outside. Open it all the way. Step out now with your hands up. Listen to my partner.
You want to get out slowly. You want to walk back. Face the garage.
Hey, don't yell out right now, dude.
Listen to what I gotta say. Don't be quiet. Listen to what I gotta say. Walk back. Walk back. Keep walking back. Do me a favor. From the collar of your shirt, go ahead and lift it up. The collar of your shirt, all the way up. Okay, keep turning. Keep turning. Hey.
20 to 40 King, it's going to be a Riverside and Cascade South Alley.
Keep turning around. Keep turning around. Keep turning. Okay, this is what I tell you to do. There you go. Let your shirt go. Walk back towards my voice. Keep walking back. Keep walking back. Keep walking. Stop. Want to do me a favor?
One more time, dude. Plain safe. Keep it quiet.
Hands on top of your head. Drop.
Okay.
Before I hand the discussion over to Lindsay, a couple of points. That video is a little different than most body camera footage that I think we're used to seeing in the news. It wasn't redacted, a necessary privacy measure, and it didn't give anyone motion sickness, as sometimes is the case. There was a few jumpy moments there. It also didn't involve police use of force. And I think that's a very important distinction. Both suspects were safely taken into custody. Often when we view body camera video, we're waiting to see something tragic. But this video shows a routine event for most law enforcement officers, a potentially deadly situation that was resolved without the use of force. In fact, I'm sure most citizens would be surprised to learn this very important statistic that we cite often. Of the 44 million contacts that law enforcement officers have every year with the public, they use or threaten the use of force of any kind, not just lethal force. Use or threaten the use of force less than 2% of the time. So it rarely happens, but unfortunately we see so much of that in the news and on Hollywood, on the big screen and the TV, that we come to the impression that cops are using force each and every day. So Lindsay, I'm going to turn things over to you now. And our panel of experts. And just a heads up for our audience, at the end of our discussion, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So you'll have a chance to ask your own questions and offer any comments you might have as well. So Lindsay, please.
All right, well, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Thank you, Chairman Floyd, and thank you to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and to Target for hosting us here this evening. And thank you to all of you who came out to participate in this event. You all have put together a really great panel, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's perspectives on this critical issue. Before I get started with the panel, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background as to why I'm here. I work for an organization called the Police Executive Research Forum, and we started looking into body cameras back in early 2013, actually. We partnered with the Department of Justice's Office of community-oriented policing services to examine how police agencies were using what was then a very emerging technology. And we really released a report on our findings with some policy recommendations last year in September of 2014. Well, of course, in the nearly 3 years since we first started working on this topic, we've really seen this issue take on a life of its own. In the wake of all the high-profile police use of force incidents that we're seeing around the country, body cameras have really become a centerpiece of the national conversation regarding how to improve relationships between police and the community and how to strengthen police accountability and transparency. But as Chairman Floyd touched upon in his introduction, even with this increased focus and kind of reliance on the idea of body cameras, there's still a lot of questions left to answer. So again, I'm looking forward to hearing some of our panelists discuss some of these questions and to hearing the questions that you all are going to raise at the end of the program. And just a brief note on the format, the first part of the program, I'm going to be asking questions directly of the panelists, and then, as Chairman Floyd mentioned, at the end of the program, you all will have a chance to come down and ask some questions yourself. So get those ready, and I think they're going to be having microphones down at the bottom of the stairwells on both sides. So I'll signal to you a few minutes before we open it up to questions so that you can come down and get ready. So with that, I think we'll just jump into kind of the first question. And I really want to start by just going down the line and having each of you describe the work that you've done with body cameras, some of the experiences you've seen or had, and then just a little bit of background on why you're here and what your perspective is. And if you have any thoughts on the video we saw, feel free to share those as well. Go for it. You go first.
Sure. Lieutenant Brian Grenon from Seattle Police Department. So the Seattle Police Department has completed a pilot program where we had 12 officers during various times and throughout their shifts wear body cameras and then officers on bikes. The challenge that we found with the pilot itself was really working through a consensus for the community on the policy. We were able to garner enough consensus with various constituencies to include the officers' unions and then various neighborhood groups to develop a policy that we thought would enable us to be able to do the pilot. And then we completed the pilot. So it was about a 6-month pilot where we tested a couple of different vendors on the body cam, and felt like we were able to develop many of the answers that we had as far as wearability and usability, and from the officer level. But we're still working through some of the challenges for our policy with the community. There's many groups that are adamantly opposed to the body cams. There are many folks that absolutely think that we have to have them right now, and we're already behind the power curve. So we're managing that. We have a grant for us to purchase body cams for all our patrol officers. So it'd be 600 plus body cameras that we're going to have. And we anticipate our final fielding on that on or about September of this next year.
So again, Jay Stanley from the ACLU, and my title is Senior Policy Analyst. So what I do is I kind of work on a lot of the new technologies that haven't yet ripened into the subjects of litigation or lobbying. So we start getting press calls, there's these new body cameras, what do you guys think of it? People from our affiliates, we have affiliates in all the states, they would be getting calls from local press or sometimes from police chiefs who are saying, we have this new technology, we don't really know what you think of it, we want to know what you guys think of it. And so I started getting calls, and the litigators who are wrapped up in their litigation, they don't know what to think of it, so they send those things to me. And so I talk to people in our affiliates who are dealing with it on the ground, and I talk to our experts in lots of different areas, everything from, so I work on privacy issues and technology issues, and I talk to our criminal law reform project and our our racial justice project, and even our women's rights project, because so many police calls are DV, domestic violence. And so we put together a policy process and came up with our recommendations for how body cameras should be deployed. We're a privacy organization. We've fought against, for example, public video surveillance, especially police video, government video surveillance. But we have supported, we're not against technologies. We've supported filming in circumstances where we feel like it helps to allow the people to watch their government instead of the other way around. So we've supported dash cams, we've supported videotaping interrogations, videotaping in prisons in some cases. And so we looked at this in that light and came out with our white paper about, I think, 10 months before Ferguson. So again, it was, along with the PERF report, it was one of the first policy pieces out there. And laid out our recommendation. And somewhat controversially, because this is a really complicated issue. I mean, of all the issues I work on at the ACLU, it's like one of the most tangled and complicated, and people have different intuitions about it. I mean, when like the NSA is like, storing records of every American's phone calls, we don't have to have big meetings to figure out what we think. But, on something like this, we did. And it's a very tangled issue, and we basically, somewhat controversially, we came out saying that we do tentatively support the technology if it's done right, if it's done with a good set of policy and the policy envelope that ensures that it will be an oversight mechanism and not a surveillance mechanism, and how to square our values of privacy and oversight, which are two things that we care a lot about.
So good evening. I'm Commander Marcus Jones from Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland. I am the commander of the 3rd District Station, which is actually in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I oversee approximately 180 patrol officers in my district. I've been actively involved in the body camera program from a different perspective. I have worked with our chief in communicating with our public, particularly many of our advocacy and community groups, and having discussions about the importance of body-worn cameras. Chief Manger, my distinguished chief, who is also the president for Major City Chiefs, has been actively involved in promoting this. And our department has been involved in a pilot that we started back in July. So we are about 6 months into our program, and we'll proceed with this for approximately another 6 months. It is our objective to have the actual full model, the full program implemented by July of 2016. Now, we have some challenges, as noted, in Seattle, and again, with technology, and we're dealing with servers and storing the information, and having to be able to equip a large amount of officers is of some grave concern for us, but it's a challenge we're willing to meet. And I will tell you that the public has been very proactive in supporting the body camera program in Montgomery County. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And in dealing with the officers from a command level, it's been my challenge to be able to have to go and speak with the officers in order to explain to them exactly what does this program mean, and the policy that was really, in a very short period of time, was really put together, but done well. The chief had it looked at it really well, and he brought in several command staff officers, as well as people from our technology, as well as our legal and labor for the county, in order to be able to address this issue. And it involved a lot of work in a very quick manner. So going back to the officers, again, when you're dealing with, and primarily in my district, I have a relatively young workforce. So now we're changing the paradigm of what was, how they were trained, and what's this new piece of equipment that they now are going to be engaged with, during their entire shift. What are the rules? What are the expectations? What can be released? What do they have control over? And those are many questions that have been plaguing them. We basically did our program on a volunteer basis. for the pilot. We went to officers and we went and we wanted to try to get 100 officers to show what the body camera program would look like. And overall, we had a pretty good response from many of the officers. But there, again, there was some pushback from some of the officers who were a little skeptical. And a lot of that had to do, too, with our union. We have a very strong Fraternal Order of Police, our union. And so that was led by them as well. But overall, we've been able to move forward.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael White, and I'm a professor of criminology at Arizona State University. And I've been working with police, with and for police on a range of issues for really the last 15 years. Much of the early work involved use of force. Recently, I've been getting into technology issues, which is what has brought me to this topic today, body-worn cameras. In fall of 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice sensed that there was a growing interest in this technology, and they asked me to write a report that assessed the evidence to date on the technology. The idea was that I would lay out on the table all of the claims that have been made about the technology by advocates, by critics, and review the evidence supporting and refuting those claims. And that report came out about the same time as the PERF report. In addition, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has created what they call a National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit. It's basically a website. If you Google National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit, you'll get it. It's an information warehouse for just about anyone who's interested in the technology, from a chief of police to a civil rights attorney to a concerned citizen. I was one of the primary authors of that toolkit. That toolkit is a living, breathing website in that it's continually being updated with information as it comes out. Also, the Department of Justice has created what they call a pilot implementation program. It's a funding mechanism that provides grants to police departments to purchase body-worn camera technology. In fact, Seattle recently received one of those grants. In September, they announced 73 awards totaling $19.3 million, and that's for year one. They're getting ready to issue the RFP again for next year. The Arizona State University, myself, I'm the co-director of training and technical assistance for that body-worn camera program. So I'll be working with all of the agencies that receive funding through that program. And then last, I am an academic, so of course I'm involved in some research. I'm funded to do randomized controlled trials of body-worn cameras in 2 police departments. One is in Spokane, Washington, and the other is in Tempe, Arizona, which is where Arizona State is.
Great, well, thank you all. So a couple of you brought up the importance of engaging the community when you are developing your body camera programs. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. You know, it seems like there's a broad consensus that cameras will improve police-community relationships, but you know, we're wondering, is that true? Is that true? You know, we've heard some people fear that having the cameras will overly formalize some relationships, and you know, when the officers are out on their beats and they're talking to people they know all the time, and you know, do they really want to be filmed? But on the other hand, of course, you know, the cameras are also seeming to be an important tool for improving the civility of some of the interactions between police and the community. So I just, you know, just based on your own experiences and what you're hearing from the community, you know, how did you engage your communities? How, you know, what have you heard? Are people responsive to the cameras? And what are some tips that you would have, I guess, for really getting the community support for these cameras? And I'll focus this question to our 2 folks from in law enforcement. So Lieutenant Grenon, if you want to start.
Sure, absolutely. So I think that's the key to any body-worn camera program for any police agency across the nation is the tone and tenor of the population that the agency supports, and that's something that we're still working on. You know, as I talked about earlier, the challenge that we have is that we really have multi multi amount of groups that have very staunch opinions, whether they're for it, they're against it. Some are sort of in the middle, and so our challenge is to engage them. When we crafted our initial draft policy for this, we engaged a sort of a broad spectrum of folks. We had our regional ACLU that was in the room when we talked about the draft policy. We've had the various groups, NAACP, and many of the other groups within the city were there as well, and then also some business leaders that were there to gather some opinions and sort of get some feedback from them. Our challenge now is to go back and really solidify the policy. We had that draft policy that tried to capture some of the concerns that the community had about when you turn it on, when you turn it off, and sort of those gray areas in between. And then also we are currently under a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, and they have some very strong opinions on that as well, about when an officer will turn it on and when they'll turn it off. And so we kind of came to a middle ground in our policy where we created some areas where officers will, after they go back and put what they call the metadata, you know, the incident number, the location, the call type after the call, but also if it's an area of that sort of borders on some sort of privacy concerns, that the officer will actually flag that for our public disclosure folks. So if there's a sexual assault victim, or somebody, or if they go into a hospital, or there's a serious injury where there's some medical work being performed, an officer would flag that. If we have one of our CIs that are out on the street, or even in our specific circumstance for this policy, we have officers. So if it's on a routine call where they're going, let's say if it's a burglary in a residence where the suspect is already left, but they want to take a report and they want the officer to come in the house, our officers are asking, I have a body camera. They inform them that they have a body cam, that they're filming with a body camera, and that they're audio recording as well, and they'll ask permission to go inside, and I ask their permission to film inside, and then they would flag that as well. So we're trying to capture some of those areas. A juvenile would be a perfect example of that, but it's a challenge. Sure. It's a challenge, and so we're working through those, and then we hope to have that finalized before we actually start going to the training of the officers, which will start in early summer. Great.
And Commander Jones, I know you said you've gone out and into the community to talk to people about body cameras, and what are you hearing? What are their concerns? What are their
Absolutely.
thoughts?
So there have been several discussions, and we've made concerted efforts to actually speak to various groups throughout the community, many of them who support body cameras readily. And in those discussions, we are discussing exactly the use of the camera, the policy that's been developed, and when will the camera be turned on, and all of those particular questions. And it's been broad. We've had specific conversations with minority groups. The chief he has a liaison group of African American community, the Latino community, and has had some very interesting discussions and been forthcoming with information really showing them how the body camera is worn. He wears one. He highlights the interactions that he may have with the public, of course, not in a public meeting, but when he is actually encountering someone on the street, and just to give them examples of that from the leadership position. Also, we've actually engaged and had very interesting dialogue with the school system, for example. Many parents were concerned about body cameras being turned on and actually in schools. When we first had the body camera program, when we piloted, we did not give it to the school resource officers. And there was some debate. We worked with this, the Board of Education as well as the school board and the actual superintendent of schools and security to discuss with them the potential that we were leaning towards, that we were not going to treat schools any differently. That the officers, if they were required to wear the body camera as a work function, that the schools would not be different. We were sensitive and are sensitive to the fact that the kids are there and they are juveniles, and we are working in that regard with the redaction program when there's a need to have that video released. But there's a grave concern we always stress to the public and talk to them about when it came to the Maryland Public Information Act as well as the Freedom Information Act. Who had access to these videos? When you deal with domestic violence victims, for example, or you saw a neighbor that, for example, was having a domestic disturbance out in front of their, in their front yard, was there someone else who had arterial motive that wasn't necessarily on a positive, who wanted to have access so they could post that actual video up on YouTube in order to create embarrassment? Those are some of the concerns that the community were giving back to us, saying, how do we address that? And those are some serious concerns, as well as noted was the sexual assault victims and as well as the domestic violence victims.
Well, I think that's interesting. You both touched upon kind of the issue of public disclosure, of who's going to see these videos and what videos are going to be accessible to the public and to the media. And I think that, like you have experienced, in my experience, that's one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue that we're seeing right now is that question of disclosure. Like you said, on the one hand, the cameras are often capturing people at their most vulnerable, and we don't want some of those things being posted onto social media, onto YouTube. But on the other hand, if an agency says, we're not going to disclose something, it could look like they have something to hide, and we don't want to undermine the very important purpose of transparency. So I want to talk a little bit about this disclosure issue, get into a little bit more. And Mr. Stanley, I know that, with the ACLU, it's obviously a very important issue for you all, that intersection between privacy and transparency and disclosure. So if you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on that and what the recommended policy you would have.
Yeah, so we sort of, we don't want to see, in terms of disclosure policies, anything on either extreme. Some states, like Washington State and Minnesota and some others, have very, very broad open records laws that basically classify all of the video captured by any police body camera as a public record subject to public release. But then there's redaction issues, and so Seattle has particularly been tied in knots by this, especially after an activist basically FOIA'd like all their video. We think that is not the right balance between privacy and disclosure, but neither is exempting all of the body camera footage from public records requests, which we've seen. For example, South Carolina passed a law, I think Texas, and what we would like to see is that most of the video, 99% of the video, routine stuff, really kind of goes into a black hole and isn't used for anything, isn't, with the possible exception of training, isn't analyzed, no face recognition, no analytics. Nobody's really even looking at it unless the police officer wants to raise it as a training issue. Management isn't scouring through it to look over the shoulder of officers randomly. With the exception of if there's a police use of force, if there's a video involved in a felony arrest, if there's been a complaint against a police officer, that video would be flagged and would be treated differently. The routine video, in what we would like to see, would be held for a period of time, say 90 days, and then disposed of. But video that's been flagged that's in those categories would be retained for a longer period of time, as well, obviously, as well as any video that's like evidence of a crime that would be treated like any other evidence. Would be retained for a longer period of time and would be subject to open records requests. One of the things that we're seeing in particular are police departments with. Our concern is that if police departments are not required to, if all the video is exempted from open records requests, then police departments will just will release what they want to release. So when the officer saves the drowning baby, they'll release that, and so forth. But when the officer doesn't look so good, they won't release it. It'll become just a police propaganda tool rather than a way of increasing community trust in their departments. We're seeing there are a lot of shootings that have been taking place where there's been a clamor from the community to see the video. Chicago was just released after a judge ordered it, and police departments are saying that they can't release video because of "quote unquote" an ongoing investigation. I just wrote a blog post about this on the ACLU site. I mean, the reason that police withhold information because of ongoing investigations is because if there's a suspect, you don't want to name them and shame them and put them out there in front of the community. You don't want to alert a potential perpetrator about what you know about them, et cetera. None of those reasons for withholding information in ongoing investigations really apply to a body camera. The police officer, if he's been involved in a shooting, knows that he or she is under investigation automatically. He or she has probably seen the video, so it's not as if he or she doesn't know what's in there. The only reason not to release it is to keep it from the public, not to keep it from the people who are involved. So, and on the other side of the equation, the public interest in oversight in how their law enforcement officers, who in theory are working for them, are using and wielding deadly force and brutal force sometimes, or even just choosing to make felony arrests. The public interest in overseeing how their law enforcement officers are using those powers is very high. And when I came out with my body camera paper in 2013, I thought there would be all kinds of debates with police departments and everything, and I was surprised that basically we had a lot of agreement, especially with police management, who don't want their officers going off half-cocked either. But this is one area where I think there has been some disagreement between the civil rights, civil liberties community and a lot of police departments, which are bureaucracies, which are organizations. Bureaucracies always try to maintain control of information about them, whether it's Department of Housing and Urban Development or your local DMV. And so this is one of, I would say, two big contentious issues that we've had with police departments.
The other one.
Well, this actually isn't with the management so much as with the unions, but it's whether or not a police officer should have the right to view video before he or she writes their initial report after use of force.
Okay, and we can come back to that issue in a bit, because that is definitely one of the big issues. But on the issue of disclosure, Lieutenant Grenon, Mr. Stanley mentioned Seattle, and you all have had quite an interesting time of it with the disclosure with Washington State's broad laws and the whole YouTube channel. So if you could talk a little bit about what you all did, how you handled that, and some of your thoughts on how you're going to handle the disclosure issue going forward.
Well, I can start off with the initial part of that. So we do, as was discussed, we do have a very robust public disclosure law that basically says that unless we have, within certain narrow constraints, reasons to not release it, then we have to release it, and then there's substantial penalties, monetary penalties against the agency that retains it. So we have been inundated with public disclosure requests for video. So we've had Encore video for going on 10 plus years. And then we have the new body camera video. So we do get those requests of any and all video, and which is a monumental challenge, because there is really no good software redaction tool that's out there that can save substantial time in redaction. So that really counts down to bodies, to humans that actually have to go through videos and then redact those pieces that aren't there. But one of the ways in which we try to highlight transparency, specifically with our body-worn camera, we worked with a gentleman who was sort of a hacker in the community that he went by the moniker Anonymous, and then he was the one that did substantial public disclosure requests in huge numbers. So our leadership worked with him. They had sort of a hackathon, brought in some tech folks and said, okay, here's the challenge that we have. You know, how do we manage, how do we solve this problem of redaction and getting you the information you need, but also protecting the privacy of the people that the law says that we have to protect, and get this within a timely manner that the law says that we have to put it out there. So they worked with him, they brought him in, and he used some fairly basic software redaction tools, and kind of a blurry, but we created a YouTube video channel basically on YouTube, and we really just put our video out there, and it's kind of blurry, and it's minus some sound, but anybody could just go to that channel and take a look at it and say, okay, here's the video, and you can see. I mean, it was a little bit difficult to see, you know, granular detail, but it still satisfied some of that the interest in having the video out there, and allowed us to try and get to that area of transparency where everybody's sort of clamoring for. So we had some decent success with that. The hacktivist that actually came on and was employed, he's since left the department. And then as soon as he left, he did a bunch of public disclosure requests again. So I think it was with mixed success. But you know, I think we've you know, we're trying to be out there and trying to serve the best interests of the public, and mindful of the challenges that we have, and there's more to come. Our state legislature is looking at the challenges of public disclosure. When the laws were made, they were made, you know, 15 years ago, when video of the nature and scope that we have now weren't sort of in the forefront of anybody's mind, and they're trying to work through that, and we're looking to see if we can come up with a reasonable solution for that that's mindful of the issues that you brought up, which I think are very valid. You know, we serve the public, and nowadays, whether we like it or not, whether you're an agency that doesn't release it or does not release it, the media and the public expect video. And if you don't release it, then you know you're almost viewed as hiding. And if you do release it, then you have to be mindful of those issues that we talked about. So I think that there's a happy balance there that we're working for.
Great. Well, thank you both for those answers. And I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and turn to Dr. White. You know, one thing that I think we're all wondering, and that probably isn't determined yet, you know, are the cameras, you know, what impact are they having? What's the actual impact? We can hear anecdotal evidence, but there's been very few studies, and there's more and more every day, but on what that actual impact is. So just from a research standpoint, you know, can you talk a little bit about what the research has shown, what you've been seeing, and kind of what some of the big gaps in research are, and what you think the topics that should be looked at going forward?
Sure, Lindsay. Just a bit on the context. A lot of people think of the death of Michael Brown and Ferguson as kind of the line in the sand, and that's when body-worn cameras were invented, and that's when, you know, essentially this interest all began. And that's not actually true. There are a few police departments in the UK that began experimenting with body-worn cameras a decade ago, in 2005. The Oakland Police Department rolled out body-worn cameras at the start of 2010. So law enforcement has been interested in this technology for a while. And really, it was the events that started in the summer of 2014 with the death of Eric Garner in Staten Island, and then Michael Brown and Ferguson, and then kind of this continuing trend of new incidents. That really has has spurred interest among citizens, among advocacy groups, and the media and politicians as well. And Craig mentioned the first study that came out was in Rialto, California, and it was Rialto is a relatively small police department. It's a department that was in significant trouble. There were, and this is no secret, you can Google Rialto Police Department to see some of the issues they were having before they rolled out their body-worn camera program. And the new chief was hired, and he came in and he initiated a number of reforms, including body-worn cameras. And he was working with Cambridge University. In fact, he was getting his master's degree. And what happened was, in a relatively short period of time, from 1 year to the next, we had the findings that Craig had mentioned. You have a nearly 90% reduction in citizen complaints against police, a 60% reduction in use of force. So at the time these results are coming out, we're also hearing about all of these tragic police killings of citizens. And a lot of people began to think that body-worn cameras would be the solution. Well, if this is what's happening in Rialto, let's do this in Baltimore, let's do it in Ferguson, let's do it everywhere, and we'll have this same effect. And the data on how many agencies have adopted and deployed body-worn cameras is just starting to come out. There was a survey that came out recently, and this was from 2013, and about a third of police departments indicated that they had deployed body-worn cameras in some level. So keep in mind there are about 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the US, and about 6,000 at the time, this was a year before Ferguson, had said, yes, we have a body-worn camera program. So we researchers then, we had some catching up to do. And there have been a handful of studies that have been completed so far. The big ticket items that most researchers are looking at are use of force and complaints. And a couple of studies that ASU was involved in came on the heels of the Rialto studies. For example, the Mesa, Arizona Police Department, they documented slightly lower but still really significant decreases in use of force and in complaints. The Phoenix Police Department also conducted an evaluation, and they documented a reduction of about 23% in citizen complaints. Use of force remained flat. The University of South Florida has been working with the Orlando Police Department, and they've been releasing some findings actually over the last couple of weeks, and they also are documenting fairly significant declines in complaints and use of force. So the one takeaway from the studies that have been done so far, it appears fairly consistent that there will be some reduction, in some cases quite large, in complaints against police officers. Less consistent, but still emerging is officer use of force. The San Diego Police Department, for example, released results from their internal evaluation that showed an increase in use of force among officers wearing cameras. So those have been the two issues that most researchers have been focusing on. There's been a fair amount of work talking to police officers, surveying officers to see how they embrace the technology. And then also starting now, we're starting to see some results from surveys of citizens. And I put citizens into two groups because you have kind of the general population. You can do a survey of the general population and ask them what they think of Donald Trump, for example, or body-worn cameras. And generally those surveys have shown lots of support for, not for Donald Trump, for body-worn cameras. The other population that we need to tap into are the customers of the police, the people who are calling with police, who are interacting with the police, and there hasn't been nearly as much work done with that population. These are the victims, the witnesses, the suspects, the spouses, the parents of victims who are having their interactions with officers recorded. And we, as researchers, have not done a very good job yet finding out what those citizens think about the recording of their interactions with the police. So that's one of the areas that I think a lot of us will move into in the future.
Great, and I think that's one of the areas that we're looking at, and PERF's doing a couple of studies in conjunction with the Arnold Foundation, looking at some of those questions and the cost benefit. So yeah, because we definitely need to see what the impact is as people all rush to get them. We just have a little bit of time left before we open it up to the audience, but I wanted to come back to the issue of officers reviewing the video before they make their initial statement about an incident in which they were involved. This has been another hot button top issue, as you said, and I'll really open it up to anyone who wants to talk about it. So I don't know if you want to start.
Well, I'll start since I'm probably taking the most controversial view of this audience. But if there's a shooting and somebody is, let's say, killed or whatever, and then the officer gives an initial account of what happened, some jurisdictions allow the officer to view the video before making an initial statement, and some do not. We think that it's a no-brainer, that it's obvious that that officers should not be able to view the video before they make an initial statement. The other side is, well, it's just common sense. Why not have the officer make the most accurate report possible and let them view the video so they can make the most accurate report? And also, officers feel that this is a game of gotcha, that the people are looking to make them out to be liars. The thing is that if you're involved in a shooting, you're automatically under investigation. There's an investigation of what took place. And nobody else in an investigation gets to see the evidence before they make their initial statement. And psychological studies have shown that when you view a video, it literally changes your memory of what took place. Video is not an objective record of what took place. Every first-year film student knows it depends on when it's turned on and when it's turned off, and the angle and the lighting and so forth. And God knows human memory is not objective either. But the officer might have remembered or experienced things in ways that were not captured on the video, and you want to capture that memory and that first-person experience of what happened before that evidence gets tainted by viewing the video. And all kinds of psychological studies have shown that it literally changes your memory, as I said. It doesn't make now. Once the officer has made an initial report, then he or she can view the video, and if I just misremembered which hand he had the knife in, or that's on the video, but I literally didn't see it. Because we have this peripheral vision, but the amount we focus on is like your thumb at this distance. We're focused on a very tiny amount, and so there is a risk that officers concerned that they will be painted out to be liars because their testimony won't match the video is a legitimate one. But every other participant in the criminal justice system deals with that issue. The person who's accused of a crime, the witnesses, et cetera. One of the effects, if you let the officers give the officers special treatment and letting them alone view the video, is that before a jury, they're going to be much more credible than they're going to be artificially credible compared to all the other participants in the criminal justice system because their account alone will match the video. Whereas everybody else's, there's inevitably going to be differences between the videos and memories. That's just the way the world is. So that's and that if you're giving police officers, again, special privileges, it will undermine trust in the system. And after all, the legal system is about trying to find what the truth is and what really happened. And if you're contaminating evidence, you're not forwarding that goal. Obviously, there's all kinds of other complexities here in terms of the union rules. Some states have rules that allow police officers to wait long periods of time before they have to give any testimony, and those things need to be reformed because the goal has to be the pursuit of truth. There will be some cases in which the officer is at fault, and there will be some cases in which there's not. We need to figure out the best route to figure out the truth in each case.
Okay, before we move to audience questions, anyone really quickly want to take the other side of the issue on this?
Well, I'm not necessarily going to take the other side, but what I would say, I think this is an example of where we are moving something very, very fast, and we don't have the answers. So, for example, in Maryland, as he just noted, if you all read the Washington Post this morning, it was an article that talked about the legislature that's now dealing with the Maryland Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which addresses the 10-day rule, really, that an officer has until an officer that's involved in a line of duty, in an officer-involved shooting or fatality, that officer has 10 days and actually before the officer makes a statement. And in those cases, the officers do not provide reports. For our department, the officer that's involved in that actual shooting does not provide a statement at the time of that event that occurred. And so we are now talking about an officer having the ability to actually look at something that 10 days down the road, whether when his or her attorney comes in and actually, works with the investigators that are handling the investigation, as well as the prosecution, the state assistant state's attorney or state's attorney, in order to present the case before the grand jury, how that would actually be handled. Those really have not been vetted out. That hasn't been vetted out. And in fact, our legislature is now working that there may be some changes to the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. And that's what's lingering. That creates doubt. And that's where some of the officers are having a little bit of heartburn, per se. You would say that as it relates to how is this going to impact me if I'm wearing the body camera and therefore a shooting, I'm involved in this particular incident. What are my rights to actually be able to have access to that actual video? It hasn't been defined.
Well, I think it's time now to turn to you all. So there's microphones down at the bottom of the staircases on both sides. So please come forward, and if you have a question, come down to the microphone so that you can and ask from there.
Good evening, thanks. I'm Terry Gaynor, retired police officer. Jay, a couple of questions particularly on your blog and disclosure. One is in your comments tonight seems to indicate that it's all the police department's decision to release a tape or not release a tape. For instance, in Chicago, if I understand, the tapes were turned over to the prosecutor within 6 days. So there may be some issue about whether the prosecutor is the appropriate person to release a tape or not. And second, in your blog, you indicated when it comes to the issue, the fourth issue, I think you talked about whether someone would be prejudiced in a trial by seeing the tape, that I think in essence, but not verbatim, you said something to the effect, what difference would it make if a potential juror saw the tape before the trial or the YouTube tape or saw it at the trial, which seems to me to forget the issue about if they saw it before the trial, they could have had a lot of discussions with people about it, whereas at the trial, you wouldn't be able to discuss that. So two issues.
Yeah, I think they're both fair points. I'm looking at this issue from my perch in Washington, and there's a wide variety of practices in terms of how disclosure handles. There are, there's again 18,000 police departments in the U.S. and there's a bell curve, and some of them are very open, and some of them are keeping things as tight as they can. And in other cases, you make an excellent point. It's not actually up to the police department. Sometimes that's because the public records laws in that state make it not up to the police departments. So yeah, I'm making a generalization. On your second point, I think that's also a fair point. I think there are certainly differences between, and so just to step back, I was saying that one of the reasons that we allow police departments to withhold information that's pertinent to an ongoing investigation and not release it through public records laws is because it could potentially taint potential jurors. If everybody in a community is seeing the video on day 1 or day 2 after a shooting, and then several weeks later is in a jury, it could affect how they and I acknowledge that is a true concern. A fair trial, whether it's a shooter or a civilian or whatever, or a police officer is on trial, a fair trial is vital. But that does need to be balanced against the public's need to know. And the point I was trying to make there is that in weighing all the different factors, I wasn't saying that there was no difference between seeing the video on TV at home before you're called to the jury and seeing it in the more controlled context of a trial. I was just saying that it's not an absolute difference, and that difference is not always going to be huge. And the other point I make is that a lot of the videos that are being captured of police shootings are not actually body camera videos, but they're bystander videos. And in those cases, people are taking their video home and they're putting it on YouTube right away, and there's no way that anybody can stop that because they have a First Amendment right to post their videos on YouTube. And yet the court system deals with those videos, whether through voir dire and the jury selection process or what have you. And so if we're going to block the public from seeing videos about how their police officers are using force, we need to weigh that against just how big is the prejudicial effect on trial going to be. So, but both are fair points.
I think we have a question on this side.
If I can stand up. Dan Sullivan, 45 years in law enforcement, never could keep a job. Dr. White, I'd just like to ask you a little question on your study, where basically you've shown that in the most part with these cases, the number of complaints were down from the public, and also the number of uses of force were down. Immediately, most people would jump to the conclusion, well, the police aren't beating people up anymore. However, isn't it also a possibility that it's because the police are wearing the cameras that individuals realize they're going to be photographed, so the exchange is a little less hostile in many cases and so forth?
I was told my mic wasn't working, so now I've got one of these. That's the $64,000 question, really. So if you're seeing these big reductions in citizen complaints and officer use of force, why is that happening? And one of the ideas about why that's happening is that basically just what you said, that cameras have a civilizing effect. That is, because there is a body-worn camera at the scene, the citizen is behaving better, the officer is behaving better, and that is what is driving these really extraordinary drops in some places in use of force and complaints. I think that's one potential explanation. I think there are other explanations that have not been ruled out, particularly with regard to the drops in complaints. We have known for some time now that some portion of complaints against officers are frivolous. Somebody's upset, they're angry, and in order to jam up the officer, they file a complaint. Well, maybe a citizen is less likely to do that now if there is video to support or refute whatever the citizen alleges. There are also circumstances where a citizen may be less likely to file a complaint for legitimate things that happened. That is, the officer actually was rude or belligerent or whatever it was, but the citizen does not want to file a complaint because the citizen knows that is recorded and doesn't want that to get out because maybe other things were going on that they're ashamed of, embarrassed of. So there are lots of different potential explanations. And with the civilizing effect, and you can think about this in terms of police officers and its citizens. What are I call them the preconditions. What are the preconditions that have to exist for a civilizing effect to happen? Well, one, the citizen, let's look at it from the citizen's perspective. The citizen has to know that the camera is present and that it's recording, and that's not always the case. And then the citizen has to be thinking rationally. I now realize that I'm being recorded and I don't want to do or say anything stupid that may come back to make me look foolish down the road. And if you've been in law enforcement, you know that many people that police deal with are not thinking rationally at the time. So I think that we haven't definitively explored the question of why we're seeing these reductions. I know I've talked to dozens of police officers in different departments around the country who anecdotally will tell me, and it's the same story over and over again, they have a citizen that they're interacting with who is rude and belligerent, who immediately stops and says, wait a minute, is that a camera? Are you recording this? And then the behavior changes immediately when the officer says yes. But I think we need to look at that more systematically. And I think, like you said, it can work both ways. It can affect officer behavior, and it can also affect citizen behavior.
Go to this side now.
Yeah, just a quick question, Lindsay. We haven't touched on the issue of cost, and I find it very interesting that in yesteryear, when the subject of providing bullet-resistant vests to our officers or more training for our officers or safer vehicles for our officers, all of a sudden the policymakers, the elected officials would use cost as a reason not to do it, all right? Now we have a situation where the public seems to be clamoring for body cameras, and law enforcement in many ways is supporting that view. The ACLU is supporting that view. So we have a lot of folks coming together on this issue. But I'm just wondering, what is the cost of body cameras? And has it in fact been a factor or an impediment in some agencies not implementing it? Because right now it seems like a runaway train that everybody's doing it regardless of the cost. And I'm not hearing any discussion about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And yeah, please.
Yeah, I could answer that. So I think initially when the body-worn camera concept came out, the manufacturers built this in mind that it was the hardware itself that was the true cost, and the agencies themselves would then store the video probably on premise. But that model has shifted now, and the model now is on the storage of the video for long time, for long periods of time. So it's really, I think your cost is a couple of factors. The size of the agency, but then what is your retention policy, right? So if you have a retention policy that says basically you're going to retain all videos in perpetuity, then you're going to have an enormous cost because that's where they're making their money. But if you have a reasonable retention policy, as was talked about before, then that cost is mitigated. But really, that's where the money is made in the industry now, is the actual storage.
Yeah, and I think just to chime in quickly, as I mentioned before, one of the studies that we're working on with the Arnold Foundation is a cost-benefit analysis to try to quantify what are the costs and what are the benefits. We've heard anecdotally from several agencies and police management that, yeah, they cost a lot, but they're worth it in saving money and defending against, lawsuits and settlements and complaints. And on the back end, they're saying it's worth it, but there's been little actual evidence found of that yet. So that's what we're looking at. We're trying to quantify how much is being saved in terms of lawsuits and complaints and everything versus how much are they spending. So that'll be an interesting thing to see in the future.
I would just add a note just to clarify that we're not really clamoring for body cameras. Some in our community are, but there are others in our community who don't like them. We've taken the position that we were asked, do you oppose these? And we said, no, we're okay with them given these conditions. I do think that there's a lot of naivete in the public who think that it's a much simpler issue and a much more of a silver bullet than it is. It's one piece, it's one tool, but my organization overall, I'm kind of like the body camera technology guy, so I focus on the body cameras, but my organization overall wants to see police reform, especially in communities that have very troubled police community relations, a much fuller set of reforms that involve training and civilian oversight and improved community policing. And so body cameras shouldn't suck up all the oxygen in police discussions about today's issues.
And if Craig, if you want me to say that Montgomery County, Maryland is very wealthy, by order of my county executive, I cannot make that statement. But I will say this, it is a tremendous cost. It is to our department. And as noted, when you talk about, we've developed, and again, it's pilot and we haven't affirmed a policy, but right now we're talking about outfitting close to 800 officers that will be in patrol, that will be wearing these body cameras. And out of those 800, you're going to be storing up to 120 days of each event that they actually record. And so that's a lot of storage that has to be held up, not including the storage that needs to be held for evidentiary purposes. And then when we also talk about the public disclosure, who's going to be the custodian of record that's responsible for actually going and getting this information readily available that is going to be disclosed? We've already had to hire, one or two people in order to get that going. And I think when this really fully rolls out, agency of our size, I can see that that's going to be more of a cost to us in regards to, hiring additional employees to address that issue. So again, and correct, the public has to understand this is not the panacea, that every time you see a police recording on a body camera, it's not going to tell the entire story. And that has to be really emphasized tremendously with our public, is that we show them the shots that the officers, you're seeing one view, and hopefully the officer's actually pointing in the direction of what actually is occurring. But trust me, there's a lot of body movements that go on that people will never quite understand. And yes, Craig, thank you for saving us today from being dizzy watching somebody run after a particular suspect, and that can really have some nausea issues to us all. So it's very interesting in its own right. And I think the cost has to be severely factored into many of these agencies that are being pushed to say you really need to have this body camera for your public trust.
Just wait until the videos are virtual reality stereo and you have to put on those things.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it's going to be all over.
All right, this side now.
Thank you all for sharing your perspectives tonight. I was wondering if you could share a successful model for implementation, either from a research standpoint or from an actual practical, like in the field standpoint. What are some agencies that you look for implementation or best practices?
What I can say, I'll do a little pitch for BJA. The National Body Worn Camera Toolkit that I mentioned, on that they have a law enforcement implementation checklist. It is 2 pages of things that a department should make sure they do as they're planning and implementing their program. So that just gives you some rough guidance in terms of the issues that should be covered. And the other thing I should mention about the toolkit is that it's an information warehouse. It does not take positions on specific policy issues such as the ACLU or PERF. It essentially says these are the things that you should think about, and the decisions that you decide on, or the decisions you make with regard to activation and retention and things like that, should be made locally, not pushed down from the federal level. I will mention one department that I'm working with, the Tempe, Arizona Police Department. They have been planning their body-worn camera program for now 18 months. The officers just started wearing cameras in November, and their process has been collaborative, both internally and externally. It's been deliberate. They've accessed all the available resources and subject matter experts to make sure they're going about it the right way. 18 months is probably way too long for some police departments. But I look to them as having what I consider to be a kind of a model planning and implementation process.
Anyone else want to weigh in before we? Okay.
Yeah, I'm Bob Bauer. I'm a retired police officer, and now on the other side of the coin, I'm an academic. I teach at a community college. My question is, how do we change the misnomer to the community where they believe that the video is the silver bullet, so to speak? I spent an entire semester with my students trying to explain to them that the video is only 2-dimensional, doesn't give you a 360. We discussed the Chicago shooting, the videotape, but how do we change the perception that those videos are the silver bullet? Because right now, even it was said on the panel that we need to get those videos out immediately. How do we change that perspective?
It's a really tough issue. I think that there is a lot of naivete about video, thinking that it's like, an objective record of things. And I think that as a society, as Lieutenant said, people expect video now. It used to be people would say, oh, such and such happened. It happened to be caught on camera. And now it's like, oh, something dramatic went down? Well, show me the video. Where's the video? And they're shocked that there's no video. And video is going to be part of so many things that we can hope that people will become more sophisticated consumers of video and interpreters of video. I mean, for what it's worth, like I'm out there talking, I do, TV and press and media, and I'm always making this point that video is not objective. So maybe that helps a little. But I don't know an easy answer. It's a tough problem. And I think that there probably will be injustices that happen either to civilians or to police officers because video distorts what the reality of what really happened. Are those injustices worse, and are there more of them than there were when there was no video? I suspect probably not. We're better off with the video, but the video is not perfect, and it's an unfortunate fact.
I think the other challenge that we have right now, to your point that you're making, is that we deal with a 24-hour news media that is actively seeking for videos, and videos. Media is a business, they have to create the ads so that they can make the money so that they can do their things. And video, right, wrong, or indifferent, are sometimes sensational that drive ratings. And I think that that's part of the storyline. and it's hard to get an objective thought process across when it comes down to business.
And I would say this, I'd sort of kind of take a different turn to look at it from a police standpoint, and I say this to my officers routinely. We speak to our recruits routinely. Everybody has a video. That's the society that we live in today. When our officers show up on a call or they're dealing with an individual on a traffic stop, you know, they turn around, there's somebody pointing a camera at them. And so, you know, what I've been speaking to them to say is, why not have your own camera where you're telling more of the story than just the 15-second clip that those individuals have? And you've got the entire story from the time that you arrived on the scene until the time you cleared the scene. And that's vitally important because that fills the gaps of some of those stories that aren't being necessarily told, for example, in the news media. We see sort of the dramatic piece, but we don't see what led up to it, or we don't see what happened afterward, and that's vitally important. So I think that's a sort of the buy-in for some of the officers, that they have to start thinking like that. And a lot of them, of course, in understanding that in the wave of technology, they really accept it, but at the same time, they know it's a tool that could be utilized on them from a negative standpoint. If it ever came to that they may be judged, then that is of their concern.
And just one quick point. I mean, there are people in my community, the privacy community or whatever, who are against body cameras. They say, you know, they're not watching the police officers, they're pointing outwards, they're surveilling us. It's more surveillance in predominantly poor minority communities. And, you know, it's just going to help the police. It's not going to be oversight. And I think that they're wrong. And that, you know, every additional source of video is more information, and we're better off having that than not having anything except for he said, she said.
Question?
Hi, Molly Slothauer, University of Maryland. One of the most interesting things that I saw from the Rialto study is that officers were regularly sitting down with their supervisors and running through tapes in sort of a continuing professional development, looking through particularly soft skills around de-escalation or just the way officers were communicating or handling situations, and looking at how they could try to improve. Sitting down with their sergeants. And I haven't really heard much about that in the discussion. You know, we know from other research that training alone doesn't tend to change employee behavior that much, that you need this sort of on-the-job tracking and professional feedback. Is that something that people are talking about as a benefit? And where do you guys see that, the place for that?
Well, I can tell you, as part of our force review board that we have, all video, whether it's body-worn video, whether it's in-car video, is brought into the board. And we have various levels of force that we investigate at the supervisory level. You know, from the sort of the de minimis type force, which is a type 1, to a type 2, which is slightly more use of force, whether that results in an injury or potential injury, up to type 3, which would be an officer-involved shooting or a significant injury where somebody actually has, goes to the hospital. The supervisors involved in that as part of the force review has to review the video, and then they have to talk to and counsel their officers, not only on tactics, but also on force and communications, and they'll look at those various angles. What led up to that force, and then the actual force that they used, and then the tactics they used, because sometimes force is unavoidable. So how did they do it to minimize that and minimize the injury to themselves or to the officers or to the suspect? So we do that on a routine basis now. But I can tell you that a lot of that was driven by our settlement agreement that we had with the Department of Justice. We went into that sort of reluctantly, but a lot of good things have come out of that, and I think that has made our department a stronger, better trained department for that.
Yeah, I can tell you that most police departments have automatic review for certain types of video. If there's a complaint or if there's a use of force, it's nearly automatic that somebody's going to look at that. What is much less common, I think, is what you were referring to, which is essentially review a video for performance evaluation. And most police departments do not do that. The Oakland Police Department, for example, is one that does. Their sergeants are required every month to audit X number of videos for each of the officers that work under them, just for performance review. I think that is much less common. I think a lot of departments do allow their training folks to go in and review videos to assess whether there are training deficits or policy deficits, but I don't think most departments are there in terms of, I guess what you're talking about is more of a soft review and a performance evaluation. I think it is a tremendous tool for that kind of assessment, and hopefully more departments will go in that direction.
And our department does have in the policy that the officer can review and critique his or her performance as a part of that, as well as the supervisor can actually review. But I know the union will push back on us if we are going to utilize this in a performance evaluation. And I know that as a matter of fact, and without a doubt. So that creates a hurdle. But the one thing I will point out, and many times in our internal reviews, and I review complaints, minor complaints that come across my desk for my officers, and there are times I can be able to come to the conclusion that the officer could have handled a situation a better way, could have communicated it to the actual citizen or the individual that they're dealing with, could have communicated it in a better way. And, you know, you can just be able to figure that out from your conversation and your investigation. And I think video would be a vital tool to assist in that regard as well. And then again, not just pointing out what's bad, but also pointing out what's good and utilizing that and training that with other officers, particularly when we work towards moving in a de-escalation mode and really kind of de-escalating events instead of, you know, really trying to go in and ramp it up per se.
Theodore Wilson, also with the University of Maryland. The literature you were all discussing, talking about the effects in reducing complaints and also mitigating some use of force. I was curious what you all thought in terms of, will this shift, or has this already started shifting as the novelty of these cameras kind of wears off with the community getting used to these body cameras being kind of used more thoroughly?
You know, I just anecdotally, we didn't do a study on use of force or complaints with our officers that were wearing it, but anecdotally, as we were going through the process and asking my officers if they noticed a difference, and it was sort of a mixed bag. You know, that in some instances they did see a difference as far as the moderation of the people that they're talking with, but in many cases there was really no difference. And it really does go down to what you talked about the rational behavior of the person across from you with the camera. So we didn't see a lot of that, but I do think that officers were very mindful that they were wearing a camera, and they were, you know, careful in their interactions, and I think that did have a positive influence, at least in our experience.
Thank you for being here tonight. Very informative. Ray Rowley, I'm a retired law enforcement officer as well, and I just want to quickly revisit an issue that we were talking about earlier, and that is the release of what amounts to, at least in my estimation, electronic evidence while an investigation is still ongoing. I think there's a number of reasons why I have concerns about that. I'm not personally opposed to police officers wearing body cameras. I think it has a number of advantages. But I am concerned about what I believe is oftentimes the premature release of evidence. And it seems as though because the public is demanding to see this, oftentimes because, as the lieutenant said, we have this 24/7, 365 satellite media, all this time has got to be filled. it seems as though we seem to be carving out an exception for the release of evidence. Would we be so fast to release witnesses' statements, crime scene photographs, results of medical examiners' reports, and other like evidence while an investigation is still ongoing? I'm a little concerned about where this is all being driven, and it seems as though because the public is demanding to see it and because of the nature of the evidence, we're more inclined to release it than we certainly would other evidence.
Would you like to address that?
I think it's kind of addressed to me. I think that all the information surrounding how a servant of the public, a police officer, uses force against a member of the public, there's a very, very strong public interest in information about how that use of force took place. And any information should be released where there's not a reason to release it, to keep it under wraps. And so I guess I would look at what the different reasons are for not releasing information as early as possible. And go one by one down those reasons and see if they apply. And there's only like 4 or 5 or 6 reasons why you hold stuff under wraps during an investigation. And if they don't apply, then you should release it. We do, unfortunately, see some departments that refuse to release things the only reason seem to be that it will embarrass their department. We also see some departments that don't close investigations for years and years and years, so the stuff never gets released because the ongoing investigation never stops going on. And it's in some cases that seems to be specifically in order to avoid releasing information that will cast the department in a bad light. I'd certainly be interested to hear feedback on this blog post which I wrote, just posted last week. If you all want to take a look at it, it's on our future blog. I'd certainly be interested in hearing feedback, and I'm open to persuasion that we're wrong. But that's the way it looks. That's the way it looks to us.
Well, I think it's. Do you have another question? Or?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
I know I'm the guy holding the microphone. But,
you tricked me.
Full disclosure, I'm also an employee of the Memorial Fund and, like many here, a retired policeman. And this was alluded to earlier. As I was sitting here listening to everything, it really concerned me. I can't imagine walking my beat or even in a car, a scout car, and having a camera that's recording all of my interactions. And I say that because I know I'm going to lose a lot of information that citizens would normally happily give me. I closed a lot of cases because I had a guy on my beat. I didn't even know his name, but I knew when he gave me information, it was gold. If I had a camera on me, that cat would not even talk to me. And I'm wondering if the panel, and if that's something that's been considered. I believe Lieutenant mentioned CIs and that kind of thing. And I think there's another side that has to be evaluated. Yeah, we're all going to be on our best behavior, and I think there's a benefit to that. And certainly when we're dealing with use of force, this is a critical tool to have. But in the overall scheme of things of being able to be the policeman I think America wants us to be, and being approachable, and a lot of the people who give you information are just regular stand-up citizens, but they want to be anonymous. They don't want to know who you are. So I'm just wondering if the panel had any thoughts about that. Because that, as I sat here, that was like a sort of a big thing to me, because I know I wouldn't have ever been as successful as I was without those interactions.
Yeah, just really quickly, I can tell you that that's something that PERF thought about a lot. We really had a lot of some of those concerns as well when we were developing our recommendations, and that's why our recommendation was that officers be required to turn the camera on during any law enforcement related contacts or during any calls for service. That way, say you're talking to the store owner that you see every day, you're not talking about anything but a football game or something like that. Those informal relationships, you're not necessarily having to record those. And also if people come forward to report a crime, to talk to you about a crime, or if they're a witness, we also in our recommendations said that the officer should have discretion to turn the camera off if the person doesn't want to speak on camera. And as long as there's some sort of accountability mechanism built in, like the officer says, I'm turning my camera off now because XYZ, then we thought that was enough. But that's PERF's recommendation, and I don't want to hog the time, so whatever.
And we actually recommend, we were very afraid when we wrote our initial white paper that police officers would engage in shenanigans and like turn the cameras off and engage in abuse and turn them back on again and so forth. And so we recommended that basically all encounters with the public be videotaped, like that be rolling. And we actually realized that we were wrong, and we changed our policy position on that. We were persuaded by PERS research and the points that people like you were making. And so we've changed to match what PERS said, which is that the officer should be required by policy, and it should be enforceable, that they turn it on during all law enforcement investigatory encounters, any encounter that turns hostile in any way. And we also called for exceptions to when recording must take place for any time any witness wants to be an informant in any way. The officer should have the discretion to turn it off.
So, go ahead.
Just real quick, just to give you a sense on how much is being recorded, an officer who's working a standard 10-hour shift is not generating 10 hours of video. Generally, what I've seen from a handful of departments is that during a 10-hour shift, an officer will record about 2 hours of video.
So I would second that. So we're probably at about 3.5 hours, just because I think we have a little bit more robust policy. But in the incident that you talked about, for social contacts, that's not a requirement for us to turn it on. The challenge, though, and you'd probably appreciate this, that we have for the officers that are wearing it. In our policy, it says that as soon as you're dispatched to a call, you will turn it on. In some instances where officers are driving and they have to drive in heavy traffic, and it may take 15 minutes to get there, and if they're working with a partner, that really chills sort of that conversation that they have in the car, whatever they're talking about. And that was one of the biggest complaints that I had from my officers, is that, I have to mind my P's and Q's with my partner in the patrol car while I'm driving to a patrol car. They don't mind getting out and, being the pillar of professionalism. But, when you're in that patrol car, you want to be able to talk to your partner. And that was one of the biggest pushbacks that we had.
And we were cognizant of that issue as well. And we also included in our policy that this was one that the officers did have some discretion, that they could actually turn off when they're talking to community members, they're talking to individuals, witnesses that want to share information about criminal activity, but are fear of reprisals or something of that sort. And particularly, we do forbid them from interviewing on-camera confidential informants. That's not allowed. So we've took that into serious consideration.
Well, I think that's it. So thank you all again for coming and for hosting us, and we appreciate your support.
Really interesting.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Encore. We hope you'll join us again next month for another revisit of past museum programs and conversations. Stay safe. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.